Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, very warm welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. We are your monthly dose of digital procurement goodness and inspiration. And I hope today is going to be particularly inspiring for anyone that's perhaps struggling a little bit with getting a budget for all of those fancy tools that are out there. Because my guest today has been super smart in how he's improvised and been able to use existing no-code and low-code tools to be able to get the most out of the digital procurement ecosystem without having to spend money on a specific procurement SaaS platform. Brajan Gatys from Personio, very warm welcome to the show.
Hey, James, thanks for having me.
And so, Brajan, we met about 3 weeks ago now, I think it was, at the Wolfpack Summit in New York, which for those of you who are listening that haven't heard of it, it was a small procurement conference that was for procurement leaders and procurement practitioners that are operating in small procurement teams. And a lot of the attendees, Brajan included actually, were from high growth tech companies who obviously procurement as a function is usually the last thing that comes to these types of companies. And usually the teams are pretty small. So it was really interesting actually getting a chance to hang out with practitioners like Brajan and just learn really how they've been able to improvise their way to being able to get some pretty good tech that they're using and pretty good solutions to enable them to eliminate and automate a lot of the grunt work. So, Brajan, just before we dig in, just give a quick intro to yourself and how you got started in Personio. Just curious, really, to give the listeners a bit more context around your background, which is obviously very relevant to what we're going to tackle on the more tech side of things.
Sure, yeah. So I've been about 5-6 years now in the procurement space. Started as a working student back at Trivago, a hotel message company. Moved to Personio, which is a HR software company. So we provide anything from recruiting, hiring, document management, job applications, payroll. We are about 2,000 employees mainly in Europe, 7 offices across Europe and New York. And 3 years ago, we got the opportunity with my current lead, who was my previous lead as well, to join Personio and build a procurement function from scratch. There was nothing, as you said, right? Hyper growth, and then eventually people figure out they need some kind of procurement that does the negotiations, and that was the moment we both came into the company and started.
So you've given some context around Personio in terms of what they do. What size of business are they in terms of revenue?
I can share the revenue numbers itself. We're still a private company, but it's definitely 9 figures. Again, 2,000 employees. We have about 40,000 customers. 7 offices and still growing quite fast.
Okay, that certainly helps in terms of contextualizing sort of what size of business Personio is. So what's your background then? Are you a software developer by trade, or did you study computer science?
I did both my degrees, a master and bachelor, kind of in business and technology. So definitely more like a numbers-driven background. I never studied computer science, anything this way. But during my studies, I kind of started to freelance as implementing Google Workspace and CRM systems for companies. So for the last 7-8 years, I've been playing around with, software integration, low-code, automation, building processes. And over the years, it really just developed into pretty much a career, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you're not a coder, but you have had some experience of doing tech or software implementations in the past.
Yes, so I'm probably just able to kind of build some scratchy JavaScript at this point, and nowadays with AI, it's definitely better. But I'm not a software engineer, but had my fair share of soft implementations, and especially nowadays with low-code technology. Obviously, there are some prefer to say low-code instead of no-code because to a certain extent, you have to code a little bit. For that, it's enough. But I didn't build like a software product from scratch.
But then with that being said, assuming that there's someone in another organization, if someone is listening to this that wants to get started, assuming there's someone in IT or somewhere within the organization that can do that little bit of coding, I don't know, most of it to me seems more in terms of creativity and having that, I guess, sort of entrepreneurial flair to figure out what can you do with an existing system to solve a specific problem that you have in your organization. And then if you figure out that you need to do a little bit of coding to get an automation to work further down the line, there's plenty of ways that you can resolve that if you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think for IT and engineering departments, it's a bit more straightforward. I would probably say that if we would have an IT person building a finance process, it would be more difficult just because of the functional knowledge that the IT person doesn't have. If we're talking about, finance teams, procurement teams, you definitely need to be to some extent tech savvy and be open to the technology and kind of understand what it is, right? But I think the major part is really just understanding what it can do and then being creative enough to find applications for it.
I love that.
Right? There's a lot of conversations about AI and then people are like, I don't know where I could even use AI. And there's just so many applications. It's pretty much any department. So it's really about this building. I mean, if I look at what we have running, which is at this point, 250 different automations that we have running on a daily basis. So it's really grow with time. The technical parts, most automations were very basic, very simple, right? They do a very critical thing, but technically it's not inherently complex. Of course, we do have quite a lot of processes where we're integrated with Workday, for example, that are a bit more difficult to set up, but the majority, technically, it's not difficult. What's more important is really how you want to build the process. What is the automation supposed to do? When is the automation supposed to do whatever you want it? And really having like this organizational framework, that's usually more difficult than actually building a solution itself.
Okay. So you mentioned in your last answer that you're using Workday within Personio as a wider sort of ERP system, which I guess kind of makes sense if you're an HR tech company because that's where they had their origins, right? So most businesses in a similar situation with an ERP that's not really fit for function when it comes to doing a lot of procurement activity would go out there and look at perhaps a source to pay, source to contract suite, or perhaps more modern companies these days are looking more at, these intake and process orchestration tools as being a more modern, AI first version of those. So the obvious question I'm going to have to ask you is, why didn't you go down that traditional route? Was it budget or did you just think that you could do it better in-house?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think I have to start with saying being an HR company, we're using Workday Finance. We're not using the HR part. I think that's something I really have to point out. So yeah, when we joined Personio, there was again nothing in place. There was no procurement system, no process, no anything. So you really had a blank canvas. What was important to us, we want flexibility. We want flexibility, customization, whatever you want to call it. We want to have an extremely high user experience. That was always very, very important to me, to a very easy to understand processes. If you are, obviously our customers are the employees, so it has to be extremely easy to approach us and work with us. And then also automation. And nowadays, obviously AI, back then it was not as big, but automation first. That's whatever we want to do. I don't want to go ahead and buy yet another product, another module, right? So back from Trivago, we kind of had our own self-built system to some extent. So we definitely took this knowledge, and from the get-go, we knew we are going to build our system on our own. We're definitely in-house first. The reason for this is that on one side, you can look at costs and thinking procurement, we're there to save money. So if I have the option between spending $250K on a product, or I just do it myself for 5,000 euros, it definitely makes sense. But we're also more agile this way. We're more flexible. And then, going out and buying just another product, we like to call it internally. We didn't go with Workday because, Workday we do integrate with Workday for supply and purchase order creation, but our day-to-day operations are not happening Workday because it's just too limited. I would say it's a traditional ERP system. In terms of intake and orchestration tools, the major ones, everyone probably should be familiar that works with procurement. I think that's an interesting point. We've been doing this orchestration logic since before the founding of Zip, right? Before, I remember when they first reached out to me 5 years ago, we've had this orchestration logic in place already. And then kind of validating for us when we hear that orchestration is this big, buzzword of procurement everyone is doing now. And we've been doing this since 5 years already. So that's why we didn't go ahead and buy one of these products, because we can just do it ourselves, right? So we use Make as an automation platform to connect all these tools. And our central tool is Airtable. And that's pretty much it. We don't need more, right? So over the time, it really went from, the traditional way would be we run a tender, we buy some procurement tools, some orchestration intake tool. Now, I don't want to go into how good these tools are, because these are all decent tools, right? It really depends on whatever you want, but they are all legit. But what if we need risk management? What if we need to push purchase orders now? Then I would need to go ahead, and it's kind of like an Apple lock-in, right? With I have my Workday or I have my Zip. I most likely will go ahead and buy the same module from them, because it's just they offer it. So I'm spending another 60K just to push my purchase orders into Workday. I want to have vendor management or risk management. I need to go spend another 50K or 30K, whatever it is, implement it. And then I'm kind of exposed to whatever they are building. And if I want to have a feature that they don't have, I'm kind of stuck with it, right? So what we kind of develop all the time is really looking at procurement, our system like a product. So when we want risk management, we just go ahead and build it, right? We buy, sometimes some external APIs, we integrate it into our existing system, and then we have risk management within a couple of days. Same thing was with P2P. We wanted to push purchase orders into Workday instead of going ahead, running a tender, looking at 5 solutions, spending 8 months, implementing a new software. We just build it in a matter of a few weeks, and then have it running, and it's just complementary to whatever we have.
Got it. So a lot of it then was driven by the risk of vendor lock-in, if I sort of summarize that, and also just the cost of being captive to one vendor if you buy a certain number of modules from a specific solution.
It definitely plays a role, but if somebody will listen to me to it and think they know better, then please call me out. But I would definitely say that with our system, we have feature parity to pretty much all major platforms and even more. So I know that we have very customized processes that none of these tools that you can just buy off the shelf deliver. So it definitely vendor lock-in and costs play a little role. I'm pretty sure when we joined, if I would have asked for a 150K budget, I would have gotten it. But I know that what we have running is just better than what we can buy. Because again, it's built exactly for our company, right? So you could take parts of it and apply it to another company. Parts you need to change, but I'm not confident that there is a tool on the market that can deliver the exact features and functionality that we are running right now.
Okay, so that's a surprising answer, actually. I thought you would have said, it was a budget constraint that forced you down that way, but from listening to you, it's really driven more by agility and flexibility, plus with a little bit of not wanting to be too dependent on one vendor. So yeah, thank you for that. It's curious, actually, that you started on this before all of these intake and process orchestration solutions were as big as they are now. I wonder if, coming into that role in 2025, whether the same approach would have been taken, but that's, I guess, a conversation for another day. I'm curious to get into a bit of the detail without getting too technical. So could you maybe walk me through what your solution is for a few sort of common procurement processes that pretty much every organization is going to have? So let's start with, how do you manage your rec to order process?
Yeah. So as mentioned before, our central tool in the middle where all the fun stuff, all the magic is happening is Airtable. So that's our database. For intake, we use Jira, and that's kind of this orchestration logic. We want to find our users where they are, and our users are just on Jira. If they would be on ServiceNow or ClickUp or some other tool, we would be integrating with this.
So Jira, sorry, Brian. So Jira is used for your IT support or for any sort of internal support request, right?
All our ticketing internally, like the whole org is using Jira. Hence, there was literally zero change management. If we come up with some, like we recently we built a AI POC or like a general software trial process. There is a ticket and then a lot of stuff running in the background. We just, create a new ticket and then everyone understands exactly how to use it, where to find it. So that's how you went with Jira. And that's where, again, the ticketing happens, right? Create a PO, you create a request, it goes to us. Usually for the ticketing, we look into Jira because there's all the, the comments and the approvals. It syncs with Slack very easily. So, if you have a question, I just can reply in Slack. But then all the information runs into Airtable eventually.
Okay. So you took an existing tool and then built a front end using Jira that then flows through into Airtable, which is like your engine, which is your foundation, your fulcrum. And then there's a process then that pushes a purchase order from Airtable then into Workday Finance.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Interesting. So what about sourcing?
Sourcing. It's pretty much the same thing, right? We don't have like a dedicated sourcing tool. If we reach out, if we want to talk to vendors, it's mainly done with these tools as well, right? People just reach out to us. Our intake is very basic. We don't ask for 1,000 questions. We keep it as simple as possible. And then, we have a couple of automations running in the background that are like vendor outreach automated with some AI involved. But we don't have like an RFP tool either. And we honestly don't run a lot of RFPs. So this part, also like vendor communication, Slack or email. But we're very, async people. So we try to minimize meetings as much as possible. But it's just Airtable and Jira as well.
Okay, so the actual bidding process then would come in via Slack or email, but you've just got more of an orchestration process of managing the vendor communication and the onboarding and automating some of the outreach to the suppliers.
Correct. So the vendor onboarding is we use a form and an email form tool is Fillout. It just integrates very well with
I know Fillout,
with Airtable. So when it comes to vendor onboarding, we have a data privacy assessment, kind of like a questionnaire. Process also very cool. This runs on Fillout. It pushes the data into Airtable. All the, outreach communication is emailed usually because not all our vendors we have in Slack Connect. Negotiations itself are just via email. So we don't have a tool where they put the bids in. I think if we would be like a manufacturing company, I would buying steel, I would probably have some platform. But like for software, I don't see the need for a platform where they put in their bidding. I prefer to just look into the order form and just reply this way.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. I certainly think when it comes to auctions specifically, it's going to be more companies that are producing stuff that are going to use that type of functionality and capability. Okay, let's get into the meaty stuff then. So you're a tech and an HR services company. So I'm guessing that you've got quite a lot of contracts. How do you manage I assume then that you're using Airtable again as the fulcrum of storing and tagging that data. How do you manage your contract management?
Sure. We have Ironclad, and you could probably argue we could use Ironclad's functionality a bit more, especially in the just in the procurement team. We mainly use it as a repository and signature tool. They have some, contract clauses, AI features that we're not using that much. Red lighting usually also happens just on PDF, Google Docs. We do have it in Ironclad, but we just don't really use it that much. So Ironclad is mainly for signatures. The contract itself runs into Airtable. And within Airtable, we have kind of a bigger process where we parsing, let's say I have an order form, right? James Consulting, you get 1 million from us. I upload the order form to Ironclad, it runs into Airtable, and then we have an LLM that reads the order form, parses the line item, the details, and generates a purchase order out of this automatically. We have a couple of contract surveys that we run automatically in the background as well. So these are all dependent on the contract. So when we activate the contract, we call it where we approve it, so it becomes active in the system. We create these contract surveys, these POs and contract owners, cost centers. We also have AI running on the contract to extract clauses, termination clauses, liability pricing. In terms of contract reviews for MSAs and DPAs, we have an AI assistant running in LangDoc, which is a very, very cool tool. It's kind of like a wrapper for all the LLMs built in Germany, hosted in the EU, right? So no training on your data, but it's pretty much where you can build like custom GPTs and chat GPTs. So we have an assistant for contract reviews where we just upload the document. We can chat with the document right off the bat. It gives you like a little overview of the risk profile that we came up with ourselves, with our legal team. And that's pretty much it. Again, eventually the contracts are, of course, stored in Google Drive as well, linked back to Airtable. But if I want to look into my contract, what we have active, I'll go into Airtable.
Okay, so even though you have Ironclad, then from what you're saying, it's used mainly from your legal team side and not so much in procurement other than the actual approval workflow and signature process.
Yeah, so the approval still happens outside of Jira, outside of Ironclad. Of course, you could count the signature of the cost center owner of the contract as an approval as well. Why not we using Ironclad a bit more? Just because we have vendors and purchase orders, requests and surveys in Airtable as well. I want my contracts in Airtable anyway. If they would be just in Ironclad, I have no relation between vendor and contract, same as purchase order and contract. So I would in the beginning, we used Ironclad a bit more. We went away from it a little bit. But just because everything we have is in Airtable, does make sense to be there. Also, if you look into cost centers, into spend categories that are quite important, we're syncing data from Workday into Airtable. So we always have kind of like an up-to-date version of the cost centers. And of course, there's a cost center on a contract. The cost centers are not in Ironclad. So really, Airtable is kind of like the central tool that syncs data from our own tool, Personio, Workday, Ironclad, and Jira.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You touched on it a little bit with what you're doing with contracts, but are you doing any sort of SRM within this ecosystem too?
Yes. So like supplier relationship management, we came up with this supplier scoring. Supplier scoring is probably the most closest to what we do, where we just have a very big number based on a lot of different factors that kind of like customize them to us, which is we go by tiering and risk to just assess how important a vendor is to our business, as well as, how high the risk is in terms of financials, category, country, data privacy, and sanction screening. And it's just kind of like this system. When we create new purchase orders, the value goes up, risk changes, right? We use Ironclad, and then it becomes a more critical function within the company. We update the records so that the tiering goes up and then the risk is updated at the same time. That's probably the closest that we have to it. Pretty much, yeah, but we don't have a dedicated supplier relationship management tool. We generally don't run dedicated procurement software that you could buy just off the shelf.
Yeah, and again, as a services company, you're not going to need things like quality management and delivery performance and that type of thing. That would something like a more traditional SRM, SQM type of tool is going to do. Okay.
Yeah. In terms of communication with the vendors, we're chatty people, and we definitely understand the value of having a good relationship with the vendors. So with our most like top 20 vendors that, not just by spend amount, just by criticality to our company. So let's take Airtable as an example. It's quite, important for our operations, but we don't spend as much as on AWS, right? Or Okta or something. Hence, we're in touch with these companies all the time anyway. So we don't need like a dedicated tool that tracks our communication. But as you say, we don't track delivery, or we also don't have a three-way match, because if I buy software, it's available straight away, right? I don't need a delivery process to verify, because if I don't get the software, somebody will let me know.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's really a summary of all of the hard stuff in terms of facts and systems and integrations and how you've set it all up. I want to move to the last part of the discussion, more around the soft skills and the mindset and the company culture aspects of all of this, because doing this in a relatively young tech company is possibly going to be a little bit more straightforward in a less mature procurement function that come in as you and your team have in a greenfield environment. Obviously, in a well-established business where there's a lot more politics and a lot more interests and people having to justify their existence in roles, it can be a lot trickier. So I wanted to ask you, in your view, what type of mindset or company culture do you feel is necessary or even essential to be able to make this approach successful?
In terms of company culture, I think the major blocker I would see, let's assume it's a company, they're a bit more conservative, but the chief procurement officer, chief financial officer still wants to innovate on the procurement function. I genuinely believe the company can be a bit more conservative, but if you get the freedom to do whatever you want to do, or like at least innovate, it can work. What I think can be definitely a big blocker is data privacy and security. We work very well with our security and legal teams. We're very good friends, as probably every other procurement team as well. So everything we do obviously is compliant. We have all went through lots of audits, and just so we do it is proof that you can work with AI, a low-code technology, and really innovate on this front. But obviously, if your company culture is very conservative, very risk, it doesn't like a lot of risk, your legal team is going to tell you, no, we cannot use this very cool AI tool or a ChatGPT. So that can be definitely a blocker. But still, I wouldn't say that any older company cannot innovate on the procurement front. In terms of the team and procurement itself, I think it's very, very important that at least one person is tech savvy, right? They don't need to be engineers, but need to understand technology and operations. I consume lots of procurement content, and then I hear often that the directors or leaders are not technical at all, which I think is definitely not, let's call it not good, right? Let's call it this way. Because if just on the functional side, I'm a procurement manager buying software, I definitely expect the procurement manager to understand where I'm buying. The procurement manager doesn't need to understand every single detail, but needs to understand what the tool is doing, why is it doing, what's the business model, how does it work, and also compare this tool to another one, understand the differences. If it comes to like operations, what we've been talking about, it has to be, I don't think it's enough to just being open, understanding, oh yeah, this AI thing or local automation, that's important. You have to understand the process itself. So just as an example, in our team, I'm pretty much 90% of my time, I'm doing the systems. My lead, Niels, and a quick shout out to him. At this point, he's not really building them because he's, the lead, he's leading the team, but he understands everything that I'm doing, understands the process, and could probably build it himself as well. So that's very, very critical. And as well as having a dedicated operations person within the team. I don't believe into central operations teams that don't have the procurement knowledge. And you can apply this to every other function as well. If I'm an accountant, I don't want a non-accounting person to build my process. Same as if I'm a procurement manager. I don't want just some engineer or IT person who has no idea what P2P is or how procurement process works to build my process, because you have this discrepancy between technical and functional knowledge where I'm explaining the IT person what my process to look like, and the IT person is explaining me what's possible and what's not possible, right? So I definitely believe into having an own dedicated operations person with a procurement background, but also the technical skills to build these things. And this is, I think, one of the main reasons why we are so fast. I mean, not go to market, we're not selling our solution, right? But why we're iterating so fast and have so many things running, because we understand the procurement part, but we also understand the technical part of it. Hence, there is no discussion with other teams. I don't need to go to anyone building it for me. I don't rely on external consultants to build my work, the integration. If I want to do something, we just go ahead and do it ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of similar logic to if you're building a website, or if you want to get a website built. I'm not a web designer or a software developer, but if I'm getting someone to build a website for my company, I need to know enough to be dangerous so as I don't get ripped off. And it's a similar relationship to what you described with your head of procurement at Personio, that he doesn't need to develop it himself, but he needs to be smart enough to ask all of the right questions of his team. Yeah, 100%. Could anyone do this with an open mind plus a bit of time to experiment, and with the company that gives them that time to experiment? Just if they watch enough YouTube videos and take a few Udemy courses, could they pick it up? Probably not to your level. You've been doing it 5+ years, but could most procurement teams with someone that's tech savvy in their team be able to pick this up?
Yeah, I think it depends really what you try to build. If you go ahead and want to build a P2P system with low code, that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
But if we're just taking like vendor outreach, right? I want to click a button in my system and then send an AI-generated message to my vendor asking for some document. Just very something simple. 100%. Anyone that's willing to learn can do it. There are lots of Udemy, or like probably YouTube has a lot of content on this. I definitely believe everyone is able to do it if they want to, right? You cannot help a person that doesn't want any help. I'm not I'm an YouTube watcher. But in terms of these things, I'm more learning by doing. I might watch a YouTube video 2 minutes, but I definitely think just going ahead and trying to build it yourself is the best way to learn. I would definitely recommend reading the API documentations of the tools that are using. That's kind of like a very interesting thing if you're running a zip or work is a bit more complicated, but if you have your tools, if you look into the API documentation, you read what you can actually do and then just put it into ChatGPT, ask them, hey, this is the documentation. How would I do this with Make or Zapier or N8N? And then you can build something very, very easily. And it's kind of, the more you do, the easier it gets. So I'm definitely a believer, every single team. I heard it quite often where they don't have use cases or don't have the time, which I think is nonsense because everyone has use cases. And in terms of time, I like to call this in Germany called Teufelskreis, or like this no capacity circle, as I would call it. I have no capacity because I have so much work to do because I have no automation, and I have no automation because I had no capacity. It's when you start a job, I want a job, but I don't have experience because I don't have a job, right? You just have to break the cycle once. So you say you don't have capacity to do anything. Just automate one little single thing that's going to save you 1 hour next week. And this hour you can invest into something else. And if you are a manager, if you're a leader, honestly, I sat down on the weekends and I just did certain things where I asked for your manager for a day off, focus on this, and the return on investment going to be immense because these tools are not extremely expensive and the value is really, really, really big.
Yeah, I love that around time because I agree with you. You may have seen this, but there's a famous comic of a picture of two cavemen pushing a cart with square wheels, and then there's a guy holding up a round wheel, and the two guys are saying, "We've got no time for this. We're too busy." And I kind of feel that we're at that stage a little bit with procurement. That I think most people, and I think it's debatable what percentage, but I would say it's only probably a quarter of procurement leaders now that are sort of stuck in the past and rooted to Excel and SharePoint as their operating system. I think the vast majority are aware that they need to do something, but they're either A, overwhelmed in terms of the tools that are out there and don't really know where to start, or B, just are so stuck in the day-to-day, as you said, and just don't have the time to do it. But you're right, you just have to make time. And my tip to anyone out there that's listening to this, that's struggling with being able to find time, would be carve out your email inbox from every email that you get that someone's addressing you directly versus emails that you're getting that you're in CC, and put those CC emails into a separate folder and just read them once every 2 or 3 days because they're not important. And B would be just carve out times of your day when you read your email. And that's one of the best productivity hacks you can get. If you only read your email 2 or 3 times a day, I know if something's urgent or if your boss calls, you might have to do something a little bit different. But in most knowledge work type of roles, procurement being one of them, especially if you're in a more strategic role, if you discipline yourself with how much time you spend in your email inbox, trust me, you will find time.
No, you're right. And I think this is also where you're jumping in with your website and bringing technology to procurement teams. If I only know Excel and I want to innovate on my process and I just build a way better Excel file that I had before, it's kind of my snake. It's like putting a rocket on a snail. The snail is still slow. It's just slightly better than before, but I want a car, right? So go away from Excel or Sheets. We don't use Sheets at all, like for some calculations, but we don't run any operations in Sheets. But you have to go out and be curious and actually Googling stuff, right? Just watch YouTube, listen to content, especially on LinkedIn. There's a lot of stuff. The websites, and just look at platforms that are procurement specific. And what we usually do, we look at procurement platforms, see what they have. And if we like something, we just replicate in our system, right? And that's definitely what you have to do. It's like have an open mind, go out, look at the different technology. Even again, we don't use any procurement specific tools. We use Airtable. You can run anything in Airtable, accounting, marketing campaigns, content blogs, but you can adapt to your own operations. But that's where you have to be a little bit creative. Take something, and adapt it to your own function.
Yeah, I love that. And for anyone that's listening, actually, if you've been on our procurement software finder, if you go to app.procurementsoftware.site, our software finder is actually the back end is hosted in Airtable and the front end is just like a pretty looking version to present that data. So yeah, I essentially run a lot of my business on the back end in Airtable too. So I completely agree. Brajan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. If anyone would like to connect with you or nerd out about no-code, low-code procurement tech and automation, where can they find you?
LinkedIn, best way, Brajan, Brajan. It's a bit spelled a bit differently, Gatys, but I can share my LinkedIn URL here.
And I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So if anyone does want to connect with you, they can do that. Cheers, Brajan. Always a pleasure and great to deep dive into what you've been up to. I love it.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so that just goes to show that you don't need to spend a fortune on technology to have a pretty efficient procurement operation. It just requires a little bit of improvisation, a little bit of creative thinking, and as well, an organization that supports you and pushes you to do it. That's all that we've got for today. But if you are interested in a simple no-code contracts app, we just soft launched our no-code contracts app that you can buy for a one-time fee. So no recurring software subscription that just does what it says on the tin. It's a simple contracts repository that sends you push notifications each time a contract is about to expire. So if you'd like to get that for the price of a conference ticket and a hotel, just reach out to me either on email or LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes, and I would love to show you a quick demo of what it can do. Until next time, thanks again for listening wherever you are in the world. Take care and bye for now.